From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
As Congressman Joe Kennedy continues his campaign for U.S. Senate, 7 Democrats are vying to replace him in the U.S. House to represent a district that stretches down through Attleboro into the northern part of Fall River. This week on the first half of Newsmakers, we continue our series of interviews with Kennedy's would-be successors with Democratic candidate Becky Grossman. Then, only 3 weeks into January and the Rhode Island State House is already overflowing with news. Speaker Mattiello backing down under pressure over an audit targeting the convention center, and Governor Raimondo running into major pushback over her budget plan. This week on the second half of Newsmakers, a reporter roundtable brings you the real story about what's happening on Smith Hill. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. Always glad to have you with us. Tim White is off this week. I'm Ted Nesi filling in. And later on the show, as I said, we're going to have a reporter roundtable on Rhode Island politics. But first, glad to be joined by Becky Grossman, Newton City Councilor and 4th District Democratic candidate. Thank you for being with us.
I'm glad to be here.
So, Becky, let's start off. We've been asking all the candidates the same thing to begin these interviews. In a minute or less, why should you be the new Congresswoman for the 4th District?
Ted, I am running for Congress with the fierce urgency of a mom that is fed up by what is going on in this country and determined to make a change. As the mom to an 8- and 5-year-old, I wake up every day thinking about the world that we are leaving for the next generation and how we're going to safeguard their future. That's why I won't stand for the NRA threatening our kids' safety at school, or the Trump administration coming after Planned Parenthood or Obamacare. I'm thinking about the issues in this race through the lens of what protects the future for the next generation.
So you mentioned 2 issues right there. I've covered Congress for a number of years now, and inevitably a congressperson has to pick a few top issues that they become experts in, that they spend a lot of time on, that they vote on a huge number. When you think about that, what would be top tier for Congresswoman Grossman?
I want to start by talking about gun violence prevention. When I brought my daughter Madeline to school when she was in 1st grade, we dropped her off and realized that her classroom was immediately adjacent to the main office. And the first thought that went through my mind was that if a school shooter were to show up there, hers would be the first classroom to go. More recently, our son Jack started kindergarten in the public schools in Newton, and I had to do what so many parents are doing right now in fumbling to find the words to say, how he would find a quiet place to hide in the classroom and wait for a teacher to come and get him if a school shooter were to show up there. I don't think that is a conversation that any parent should have to have with their child. The NRA is standing in our path, and the only reason that we can't make reasonable gun legislation in this country is because of the NRA, and that's why I want to go to Washington and take them on.
You know, the 4th District, it's a diverse district. It goes all the way up from Newton and Brookline down through Attleboro into Fall River. It includes some communities that have more rural cultures, places like I think of Rehoboth, places where people like to go shooting. They might say, well, I don't know if I want a congressperson who wants to take all the guns away or something like that. What do you say to someone in this district who maybe owns a gun, maybe likes to go shooting, who says, well, it sounds like, can I trust you that you respect my point of view on this?
So I was raised by a dad who's a hunter, and I grew up in a house where there were guns. Those guns were handled safely. The ammunition was stored separately from the guns themselves. And if you asked my dad, would you mind if we checked your background before we allow you to purchase another firearm? He would say sure. And if we said to him, do you mind if you're having some mental health challenges, if we go before a judge and think about separating you from firearms while we make sure that you're okay and that you can handle these weapons safely, he would be okay with that too. I am somebody who believes in reasonable gun legislation that the vast majority of Americans agree on. I think there's a tremendous amount of progress we can make that keeps people safe and still allows people who want to hunt and enjoy that sporting activity in a very reasonable and safe way.
It's not been lost on those of us who are in the southern part of the 4th District that all the candidates, all the Democrats running right now are from either Newton or Brookline, at the tippy top, right, which are very much in the sort of greater Boston suburbs nexus. So for people down here, voters in Attleboro, voters in Taunton, voters in Fall River and the surrounding suburbs, you know, if they're skeptical, saying how are these people going to are they going to care about our part of the district, and what do they know about it? Do you have how much familiarity do you have with this part of the district?
Well, I want to talk about some of the key issues that I think are on the minds of people in this part of the district that I think are central to my campaign and to anybody who's seeking to represent the 4th District. First and foremost is economic inequality. There is a 5 times differential from the north to the south end of the district in terms of annual median household income. I think that if we are one district, we need to be one robust economy, and that a representative for this district should be committed to bringing job growth and economic development and inclusive economic prosperity to those communities that were the hardest hit by the recession and have had the hardest time bringing jobs back to the region. That's why, if I am so fortunate as to be elected, it is a priority of mine to have a member of my staff whose focus would be that job growth and economic development. And I think that that's going to be critical to somebody who's representing this area. The other thing that I want to mention is that as a Newton City Councilor, I had office hours not just in my own neighborhood, in my own ward, but across the city of Newton in each of the 8 wards. I have made a pledge to be present and to have office hours in every municipality in this district, all of the 34 cities and towns in my first term, if I'm so fortunate as to be elected. I believe in showing up, and I think that people want to know their representative, have an opportunity to talk to their representative, and I'm committed to doing that.
Democrats have generally been critical of tax cuts that are better for the wealthy, but one that can be challenging in this part of the country is when they remove the cap on state and local tax deductions. And I'm curious, if you go to Congress, would you support putting taking away the cap on those deductions? It's capped now at $10,000, or do you think that was an appropriate move?
Well, I think that you have to look at the cap on the state and local taxes in conjunction with the Trump tax plan as a whole, which, as you mentioned, undoubtedly had the effect of concentrating wealth in the hands of those few Americans who are the wealthiest among us and who do control the majority of the wealth in this country. I think that that has to be rolled back as soon as we can get Donald Trump out of the White House. And that any individual changes that we're talking about that were done in conjunction with that policy need to be looked at as a whole to make sure that we are returning wealth to the middle class and those people who are really struggling today. If
there was an up or down vote on a bill to repeal the cap, would you be a yes or a no?
Well, I think that, as I said, you can't look at any one particular tax policy in a vacuum. I do think that lifting that cap could have and would have the effect of providing some relief to middle-class families and a lot of people here in Massachusetts who have been hurt by it.
So let's talk. Healthcare has been a huge issue in the Democratic presidential race, and you have people supporting Medicare for all, but you also now can see some concerns among Democrats about plans that put a full ban on private health insurance, say no private health insurance, everyone goes in a public plan. Where do you come down on that debate inside the Democratic Party right now? Do you still see a place for private health insurance, or do you want that gone?
Well, first and foremost, this issue is deeply personal to me. My mother has been struggling with a rare autoimmune disease over the last 4 years and went from being healthy and vibrant and active one day to being incredibly sick the next. It is not okay that it costs thousands of dollars a year in prescription drug costs in order for her to stay alive. And it's not okay that families all over this Commonwealth and this country are in crisis, having to choose between the prescription drugs that they need or the food on their table or their rent. Where it concerns the question that you asked, I would love to move in the direction of Medicare for all. I would start with Medicare for all who want it. The reason for that is that my underlying value here is to get as many people covered in a quality way, as affordably as possible, as quickly as possible. I think that starting by expanding the public option is the way to do that, and that private insurance would have a place there.
Let's talk about politics. You have not one but 2 Massachusetts Democrats in the race. You have Elizabeth Warren at the top of the field, and then Governor Patrick doing whatever he's up to somewhere further back in the pack. Are you supporting one of them for president?
Like all the primary voters, I am watching this very, very closely. I feel fortunate that we have
coming in Massachusetts. You don't have too much time left.
Well, I feel fortunate that we have a lot of great candidates in the race. Of course, I have tremendous respect for both Senator Warren and Governor Patrick. I think that the the most important thing is that no matter who our nominee is, that we need to come together around that individual, because the number one focus has got to be getting Donald Trump out of the White House and defeating him.
Do you worry about divides as you watch, it's getting a little more negative out there on the hustings, and some people saying, well, the Democrats tear each other apart and that will give Trump a boost? Does that worry you at all, or are you comfortable right now with where the primary is?
I think that we have to go through a process of evaluating our different candidates and then coming together as a party around whoever that eventual nominee is. And that is going to be critical for the Democratic Party to come together and to work together to defeat Donald Trump. And I'm fully confident that we will. Well,
the reason you're sitting here today as a House candidate is because Joe Kennedy's moving on to challenge Ed Markey for Senate. Are you supporting Kennedy in that race?
I'm really focused on the primary here in the 4th congressional race and on serving the voters of the 4th district. I have tremendous respect for Congressman Kennedy. I have tremendous respect for Senator Markey. And I will support whoever our ultimate nominee is for that seat.
As you watch the impeachment proceedings continue, I have little doubt any of the Democrats in Massachusetts would have been a vote for the impeachment articles. But do you think the Senate should vote to remove President Trump from office?
I absolutely think that the Senate should vote to remove President Trump from office, and I'm concerned that Mitch McConnell is doing everything in his power to stack the deck and to prevent this trial from going forward in an appropriate way, and absolutely think that the president should be removed.
A bigger picture, when I sometimes like to ask candidates a bigger picture question, kind of get a sense of them. Who inspired you to get into politics? Of politicians, living or dead, who, don't say Kennedy or Markey because that'll get you in trouble, but who is someone that made you think, I want to go into this, I could go into public service?
Well, I wouldn't point to a politician, I would point to my mom. I learned at a very young age, when I was 9, what it meant for a group of committed, passionate citizens to come together and to accomplish change. When I was 9, as I mentioned, the powers that be in my community wanted to put an incinerator in our neighborhood. My mother, who had never been politically active before, said, there is no way that we're going to let our community and our kids breathe in what that incinerator's putting out. She gathered together with friends and neighbors, fought back, contacted elected officials, and won. And that's what showed me what a group of committed, passionate citizens can accomplish, and first inspired me to think about politics.
And what do you think, the 4th district candidates can start to seem a blur, I think, to folks across the district maybe as it starts to get more attention. What separates you? A lot of you, we've had a bunch of you on now. You have fairly similar positions on the issues. What do you think makes you different for a voter trying to pick between the bunch of you?
Well, I would point to a big focus for me in this campaign, which is that I'm a mom of 2 young kids. That's the lens through which I see the world and how I think about the issues. Right now, out of 435 members of Congress, we only have 25 who are mothers of school-aged children. I think that if we had 100 mothers of school-aged children in Congress, it would change the conversation on everything, from guns to healthcare to immigration. I am running, as I said, with that lens and thinking about what's in that long-term best interest of safeguarding the future for our kids. I think that is a really important message that's going to resonate with the voters in the 4th District in this race.
All right, Becky Grossman, Newton City Councilor, 4th District Democrat, thank you for joining us. And we've had interviews with a number of her 7 rivals so far. Go to the Newsmakers page on WPRI.com and you can watch all of those. Don't go away, though, because coming up, we're going to talk with a group of Rhode Island reporters about all the drama at the State House so far this January. Stick with us on Newsmakers. Newsmakers, I'm Ted Nisi, filling in this week for Tim White, who is off. And I'm joined today by 3 of the greats of Rhode Island journalism, my WPRI 12 colleagues Eli Sherman and Steph Machado, and WPRI alum Dan McGowan, who's now at the Boston Globe, but still found his way back to the studio. You found your way to EP, I'm glad.
The traffic was heinous.
Yes,
but not as bad as Boston.
So. Yeah, exactly. And you have to go see the powers that be. All right, so we have to start, guys, with this explosion of controversy around the convention center audit that I mentioned at the top. Without going through every last bit of it, it comes down to the fact that Speaker Mattiello's team ordered an audit, and it raised a lot of eyebrows because it came at the same time as this personnel investigation into his friend Jim Demers, who is the head of security there. He's now backed off. And Dan, you and I have been covering the Assembly for a long time. Speakers, their authority is very important to maintaining power in that divided caucus. And to see the Speaker backtrack so abruptly Thursday morning, not where I think the Speaker and his team would have wanted to be.
No question about it. It reminds me a little bit of last year with the chiropractor and sort of putting money into the budget, and then once you reported it and figured it out and really shined a spotlight on it, the Speaker quickly backed off. Actually, to his credit, it's one of the things he's shown a willingness to do when he when he does get a lot of pressure. He comes back and he is willing to relook at it. I do think, though, excuse me, politically, I think the challenge that he has, or the interesting dynamic here is something that we're all buzzing about. I know we're all getting text messages, and the state insiders are all buzzing about it. For him, all he has to care about are the people in that room, and we haven't seen any sign yet that the room is going to change. I think as long as he has them, as long as he has, if you don't have the majority leader, Joe Shekarchi, coming out and saying, boy, this was a real mistake, and slamming him, people are kind of standing by him. Until that changes, I don't think it matters for him all that much politically. I do think it hurts him going forward. You're in an election year, he's obviously in a Trump district and things like that. This could be something that affects him down the line, but in the room, not sure that it matters that much.
Yeah, that risk of death by 1,000 cuts. Eli, our team's been reporting on this for weeks now and doing stories in the last week since it boiled over. One thing I think was fascinating to me was how fast the way the Speaker's team positioned it changed Thursday morning. You were actually at one of the meetings that was a crucial part of that. Talk about how that all went down.
Yeah, Thursday was especially a busy day. In about the course of an hour, we saw a couple different entities challenge the Speaker and this audit. It first started with the House Minority Leader, Blake Filippi. He came out with a lawsuit against Mattiello, and then just about 20 minutes later, the Convention Center Authority Board voted to not comply with the audit. And then probably half an hour, 45 minutes later, the Speaker decided to cancel the audit. So it was a lot happening in just one morning, and you saw everything turn on its head.
Yeah, and it almost seemed like they didn't want to test too much the legal limits of their power in the Speaker's office over the Legislative Leadership Committee that was at the center of this.
You don't want a judge coming in and saying anything.
You don't want a judge deciding. Exactly. Steph, and it occurred to me as I'm watching all this, as I was writing about Rep. Filippi's lawsuit, it wasn't even the only lawsuit against Mattiello by another elected official at the moment, because he and Senate President Ruggiero also being sued by Governor Raimondo over marijuana regulations, which you've been doing a lot of reporting on. They now have their own bill to kind of take back control over pot regulations. You were at the hearing Tuesday night. I'm not sure every rep is ready yet to vote for that as written.
No, definitely not. And I think, the bill itself is part of this power struggle between the governor and the legislative leadership, and whether or not she can, set regulations. They said she's legislating by regulation, but the bottom line is it's going to affect real people, these cultivators who have been growing marijuana in Rhode Island for the last few years. Claim that they're going to be put completely out of business by this bill, which would allow the 6 new marijuana dispensaries to grow their own cannabis. For those who aren't paying, close attention, there are going to be 6 new marijuana dispensaries in Rhode Island, up from 3, so there'll be 9 total. And the cannabis growers, they organized, they went to the State House, they all testified. They said, I put $1 million into my business, and I'm going to have to lay off all my employees, and I'm going to have to close down. And I think a lot of lawmakers, including the chairman, Bob Craven, are going to have to think really hard about that. And he said afterwards, he was like, we don't want to be putting people out of business. So it seems like there's a chance of it being amended before this actually becomes law.
And you did a great 12 on 12 digital documentary about the business of cannabis. It's on our website, and I really do recommend watching it. And one thing I took away from that, having covered this more episodically, but having you put it all together in one place, was sometimes we think of marijuana as something that will make people a lot of money in the future when we have recreational. There's already a lot of money in that industry under medical.
Yeah, it's people are making a ton of money now. The existing 3 dispensaries are making north of $50 million a year, and that, by the way, goes to Speaker Mattiello's argument that he made on Newsmakers last week when he said, look, you've got these 3 businesses making, he called it a monopoly, a ton of money, and then we're going to have these 6 new ones. If they can't grow, they can't compete equally with the existing ones. The idea would be to spread that wealth a little bit more. The counter argument is that there's lots of states that do some retail only licenses, some vertical licenses that allow them to grow. So,
and of course, recreational is back on the table, at least on paper, because the governor put it into her budget, which seemed to land like a lead balloon with legislative leaders not unexpectedly. Dan, you've been talking, I know, to lawmakers and sort of taking the temperature since the budget came out. What are you hearing as you listen about how they're reacting to that $10 billion plan.
Well, it's funny to see the certainly the legislative leaders, dead on arrival when it comes to marijuana and things like that. What's interesting, I think, generally speaking, the budget has a lot of things that people and lawmakers really like, right? I think we had the speaker at an event just last week, and he was very high on pre-K, more high than I'd ever heard him before. So usually, though, these fights come down to, all right, there's a bunch of new proposals, and how are we going to be able to pay for them? What's interesting about this one is you've got to fight with, marijuana, but that's a revenue proposal, right? The governor's proposed kind of scaling back the car tax implementation, things like that. What the House is really going to have to do is find ways to keep what it wants, but also find that revenue that the governor has proposed. That's not going to be very easy.
Yeah, praying a bit for enough economic uptick, probably, that the revenue comes in higher in May, right, when they look forward. Eli, one issue that blew up, I'd say almost immediately after we all got briefed last Thursday, was the governor's plans for changes at the Veterans Home. You and Tim White have been reporting a lot on the challenges there in recent months. Where would you say things stand now with the discussion over what to do with it? This is, of course, the home for veterans who served in wartime, and they're living in Bristol in the new facility.
That's right. So over the course of the last 3 months or so, Tim and I have been reporting quite a bit on some scaling back at the home that's been happening. The state has been chipping away at different benefits for these wartime veterans. There's about 200 that live there. They have money problems, and they have pretty clearly since the beginning of the budget started back in July. The governor is proposing more money than she proposed last year, but to make that happen, she's asking the residents to pay 100% of their monthly income to live there. That's up from 80%, which is what they currently pay right now. So basically she says, okay, the state will pay more towards these benefits that you guys want, but you're going to have to pay more too. And that immediately got some pushback, not only from the veterans that we've been talking to at the home who feel like they're getting pinched as it is with all these different cutbacks, and 80% of their income is already a lot. I should note that they do get a monthly stipend back from that, so it's not just like they don't see any of that money. And also House Speaker Mattiello on this show, I believe, last week said, no way, we're not gonna make our wartime veterans pay more to live
and
there.
Now ordering, I think, a House Oversight hearing, which
That's right.
House Oversight only does hearings on things that get beat up in the end, I find, in my experience.
That's right, scheduled for February.
I feel like there's a lot of things that are already no way in the budget, and it's January. So I think, we don't even know, there's so many things that we still don't know how they feel about. But to see so many things that are already like, well, we're not doing that, we're not doing marijuana, we're not going to do these taxes that we already rejected last year, it's going to be really interesting to see how they manage to patch this up in June.
That's my big question is, as you alluded to, Dan, you have to find money somewhere if you don't want to do part of why she puts unpalatable revenue things in is because she wants to do other stuff and you have to pay for it somehow, and the House will face the same challenge. So that's going to be interesting. Having Steph and Dan here, I have to talk about Providence a little bit. We have unexpectedly yet another the city council just is always in an election season, it seems. Steph, we're taping this Friday morning, deadline later today for the candidates who want to run to succeed Councilman Seth Yurden, who has stepped aside just partway through his term. Are you expecting a big field or just a couple people? What do you think? Well,
so far we have 3 Democrats who have announced they're running. A teacher at the Wheeler School, John Gonsalves, a nightclub owner, Anthony Santuri, and Nick Cicciatelli, who is in real estate in Providence. All 3 of them have already put their papers in that they're running. The deadline, as you say, is later today. We're taping this on Friday morning, but so far no one else has announced that they're going to throw their hat in the ring. So it looks like a 3-way Democratic primary that we're looking at here in a really interesting ward that has a wide geographical map on the east side and downtown, and has a lot of things in the ward that are of note and of interest that we're going to be covering.
And Dan, you've been covering council dynamics for a while. It can be a little Byzantine, I think, for those of us who aren't in City Hall day to day, because they're all Democrats and there's always shifting alliances and everything. Can you just put into context how sort of this ward matters and where Yurden was at this time, what you expect the fallout to be here? Yeah,
the interesting thing is that Councilman Yurden, who once was a very powerful member of the council, he was the majority leader under Mike Solomon when Angel Taveras was the mayor, has really been, kind of taken a step back. One, he didn't win a leadership fight, so he was on the outside looking in. And so for the last 4 or 5 years has really, not on a lot of committees, hasn't been a major presence. Now you're going to get some potential, someone who's going to be energetic, who Steph is exactly right. That ward is very interesting. Having control of downtown, especially as more people flood into downtown, as you see more economic development down there, that's the most attractive council seat in the city. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the person that wins there, but still needs their votes from the Fox Point area, can handle that dynamic. But it sets it up for a really interesting person. The person could be the mayor from Ward 1 potentially at some point.
Interesting. All right, Eli, 30 seconds. You had an interesting story yesterday about housing. Tell us the latest on what's going on in the Rhode Island housing market.
It's getting more expensive. That's the short of it. We see the housing prices, they're back above pre-recession levels. People remember the boom-bust cycle that led into the Great Recession. We're finally seeing the median price of homes go up above $280,000. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. Affordable housing, of course, is a big discussion at the State House right now.
All right, Eli Sherman, Steph Machado, Dan McGowan, good to have the band back together. And next week, Tim White will be back from his well-deserved week off. So the two of us will see you here on Newsmakers. Remember, if you missed any of this episode or any other episode of the show, you can catch them all on WPRI.com. And you can also subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. See you back here next week on Newsmakers.